Maybe somebody that's in the product space right now or trying to get their products in front of more browsers to become buyers can maybe understand what the thought process was of why you went in the route that you did.
The number one Achilles heel of most aspiring entrepreneurs, of most business plans, is customer acquisition. To have a successful business, you have to have a reliable way, a scalable, reliable way of acquiring customers affordably. And if you don't have that, no matter how good your product is, no matter how good the idea, no matter how talented you are, you don't really have product market fit. You don't really have a business yet. Most entrepreneurs think the way to be successful is to avoid competition. The reality is there's always going to be demand for somebody else that does it with excellence.
All right, guys, you are in for a treat as we get to talk to the co-founder and CEO of Simple Modern, Mike Beckham. Thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
I was doing a lot of research for this interview and just so blown away by your journey, starting Simple Modern, where you are now, being in all the box stores, Target, Walmart, Amazon, like all over the place. I'm sure most people listening, if they go into their kitchen or somewhere in their home, they probably see one of your products. And so there's so much that we can unpack with how you did that, how you built that. And I also think that there's value in unpacking the challenges, the mistakes, maybe a couple failures if you had any, to get there too, because I think we learn from both. So before we start dialing into just your entire build and the growth trajectory that you're on, can you take us back to how on earth did this company come to your mind? And what did you know when you started it that it was going to be the household name that it is today?
Yeah, I don't think we knew that very, very clearly. I think certain levels of outcome you just can't ever like expect. Maybe you hope that someday you could build something like that. But really the way to understand, I think, the company is that I spent about half of my career out of college in the nonprofit world. And then I spent another chunk of it building e-commerce companies with my brother. And the cumulative experience I had between those two periods of time produced a view that business can be this incredible change agent, this incredible force for good in the world. And also that like the work that I'd done in the nonprofit world, investing in the lives of people, that relationships are what really matter at the end of the day. And that part of having meaning and purpose and accomplishment is actually making some kind of a positive impact on the world. And those two things kind of combined to create, I think, the ethos that we founded Simple Modern with, which was, what if we created a really radically differently structured company where we focused on who you work with and the culture and the purpose of the company being the way that you impact people, even more than how much money it makes. And so when we founded it, I have two co-founders. We started with those, honestly, pretty idealistic ideas about what a company could be. And we didn't even know what we wanted to sell yet. We just knew that we wanted to build a really different type of company. All of us had pretty deep e-commerce skills. And so I think that we had an idea that, hey, whatever we do, we should start by working with e-commerce. Specifically, Amazon for us was the first place that we really started to sell. And all the other stuff, getting into drinkware and the growth since then. And like you said, the trials and tribulations that come with growing something of this scale, those all happened downstream from understanding what it was we were trying to build. I saw somebody, they posted this on Twitter today. It was something they'd written, but I thought it was really good, which is, if you lack a larger worldview and a larger sense of mission and purpose, in a society like ours, you'll always kind of default down to money as being like the thing that you're pursuing or the ways that you're evaluating success. And I do think one of the things that's been really helpful for us is that we've had some higher ideas in building a business than just like, hey, how can we, create something that makes the most money possible? And as a result, we've been able to hopefully create a business that not only has been very financially successful, but that financial success has made it possible for us to be about a lot more than just making money. And that's probably the way that I would describe Simple Modern. And as it's grown, as you mentioned, we've become a household name. I think this year, in the next month, we'll manufacture our 50 millionth piece of drinkware. which is crazy. I wouldn't have believed you probably if you had told me that. And I try to cultivate an attitude of still being thankful every day when I wake up. Every business, I guess one thing I would say to anybody listening to this is no matter how you're situated, no matter what your circumstances, there's always things that aren't going the way that you want them to go. There's always frustrating things. There's always things about your business that you wish were different.
Absolutely.
And so I do think one of the things that I've learned in the journey along the way is how to try and really savor and appreciate the step that you're at, because otherwise it's really easy to get drawn into just focusing on what is the aspect of my business that's frustrating or stressful or not quite how I want it to be.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's fun to be at this scale, but I've really enjoyed the entire process. And I love that your show is talking about this and helping people who are actively building something to be more effective at it.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot. Number one, I think there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of bad information out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot, I don't know, it's like the rise of social media has just brought out so much junk and garbage that really it's shiny object syndrome, which most entrepreneurs already struggle with. And then it's derailing them into all of these like fast wins and not really building anything of substance that's sustainable. Because it's easy to grow something, but it's
Yeah.
really complicated to create something that's scalable, sustainable, and eventually exitable at some point.
Two
And so
two observations I would make on that I
yeah,
think are good for everybody to hear. I mean, one is that a lot of the stuff that's out there, there is some kind of self-interest in why people are sharing it. And a
yes,
lot of times they want to sell a course or there is some kind of economic interest. And for me, interestingly, I didn't get active on social media at all until I didn't need anything in return, because I knew that it would be easy for me to try and turn it into something that was more about me. And I wanted to, if I was going to engage in things like this, I wanted it to be an actual act of giving where, like, hey, I want to help other people be successful. The other thing that you said, and I think that this is so true, is that you see so much advice that's about kind of short-term success or tactics, and it's not about building something long-term that has enduring value. And one thing that's, I think, both intimidating but also reassuring is building something that has actual value that someone else would want to buy, that has real enterprise worth. In some ways, it's not that complicated at all. It requires consistency and compounding and gathering talented people and sacrifice and, building a reputation. So none of these things are like mysterious, right? But they're hard. They're not easy. There's no shortcuts. And last year, our company, we went through a double. We went from about 90 million in revenue to about 180. And I've been asked a lot
congrats.
about that jump. Yeah, thanks. But, people want to know, like, why? How'd you do it? And it's interesting, there's probably some things I could point to and say, well, hey, this was a catalyst. But I actually think the truest answer is, well, we were just in the 8th year of compounding of what we'd built. And so some years our growth, I think, has on paper looked like less than what actually happened. And in some years it's looked like more. But a lot of it is just the gradual process of being about the right things inevitably leads towards building something of value and something that people want to do business with. So I've learned that I can't totally control the market and how quickly the market recognizes the value we create, but I do have a lot of control over building something that has real long-term value. And I would say that as an encouragement to everybody listening to this, that you can do it because these things aren't complicated. They're just not easy. And a lot of people aren't necessarily willing to kind of pay the price to do them.
Yes, simple. It's actually simple, but it's not
Yeah,
easy.
that's
Like
right.
the strategies are simple, but to execute and implement them well isn't easy. And it
Well
does
said.
take sacrifice. And so many people want that get rich quick. They want the hack. They want to lay on the beach on their laptop
Yeah.
and build a unicorn. And it's like, it doesn't quite work that way, but you can do it if you're willing to do the work. And so I love that you talk so openly, because I find when I talk to other founders that have built something really of significance and something that someone will want to acquire, an actual asset and not a job, it's
Mhm.
like this ethos is all the same, where nobody is doing it by like, not working at all. Nobody is doing it by just like trying to get something quick and just focus on the money and get out. And so I love that. And I can tell that your ethos is what's carried you as far as your intentionality in the build. And I think anyone listening might be like, well, that's really great. You just did a double. You guys are highly profitable.
Sure.
I'm just trying to figure out payroll and where my next customers are coming from. So to speak to those people for a moment,
Yeah.
could we go back to, you said that you didn't even really know what you were going to produce as far as a product. You just wanted to build the ethos, the foundation of the company first, which again, so many founders miss. They just go into actually fulfillment and production and they miss the foundation. Can you talk about how you defined what that first MVP or first MVPs that you went into, why you chose with intention Amazon, so that maybe somebody that's in the product space right now or trying to get their products in front of more browsers to become buyers can maybe understand what the thought process was of why you went in the route that you did?
Yeah, I think I can give several helpful principles here. The first thing I would say, I do a lot of teaching and speaking around entrepreneurship and evaluate a lot of business plans. The number one Achilles heel of most aspiring entrepreneurs, of most business plans, is customer acquisition. To have a successful business, you have to have a reliable way, a scalable, reliable way of acquiring customers affordably. And if you don't have that, no matter how good your product is, no matter how good the idea, no matter how talented you are, you don't really have product market fit. You don't really have a business yet. So for us to understand that Amazon could be that channel was, I think, a big breakthrough for us. We saw the opportunity. We saw how it was growing. We knew we had skill sets in that area. And then we had to start to think about product. And for us, what we decided to do was look for big categories. Now, this is another counterintuitive thing. Most entrepreneurs think the way to be successful is to avoid competition. And that can be very good. Finding a niche that nobody else is doing where you have low competition. I think even if you're in the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey and you're trying to build your skill sets, that can make a lot of sense. But one of the things that I try to point out to people is that cuts both ways. The smaller the smaller the niche, the harder it is to acquire customers.
Yeah.
We looked at drinkware and said, this is a massive category. I mean, literally in the United States, something like between plastic and stainless steel, you probably have, 4 or 5 billion pieces that get sold annually.
Wow.
So, and worldwide, who knows what that number is, but it's obviously a really big number. So you can become a pretty big company without even having a huge market share in, an industry like that. Now, there's going to be competition, but that's also just because there's so much pie to go around.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that I try to really drive home with people. The world has a deficit of companies that are run with excellence.
Mm.
Always, in every industry. And so no matter how competitive a product category might look to you, the reality is there's always going to be demand for somebody else that does it with excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Like in general, starting a restaurant is a terrible idea. Like on the whole, it's a terrible idea. But if you can do it with absolute excellence, every market in the world can support and can help thrive a really excellent restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you can find a product category where you know there's a lot of demand and you have the skill set and the drive to do it with real excellence, then there's going to be an opportunity to build something special and to build something that has value. So that was where we started. We picked a category. The one other thing I think I would say is we did a good job of thinking through the way that our product category might develop. We looked at drinkware and thought of this as functional fashion. So, and I don't think the market had really fully identified that this was going to be treated kind of the way that we treat a purse or a handbag, or a watch or shoes, where some of it is, I use this to help stay hydrated. And some of it is, I care about how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, I think, come to the forefront over the last few years. So that insight was helpful. And then the other one was we picked a channel in Amazon and e-commerce where there are certain strengths to being able to sell. And the fact that you don't have limited shelf space, you can do more colors, you can do more sizes. And at a time when that was not the strategy of most of our competitors, we really leaned into, we're going to have a lot of colors, we're going to have a lot of sizes, we're going to have a lot of different options for people to choose from. We think this is where the category is going. And I would say that single insight really helped set us up to be successful.
I wish, okay, so everyone listening needs to pause this, rewind, or if that's a thing, hit the back button, and go back and listen to everything you said, because I love how you talk about this is literally every business I've ever been in. I'm not trying to innovate something new. I'm just trying to do it better than what
Yeah.
somebody else has, because you can get a fraction of that market share far cheaper than if you try to niche down into something really small and cast this like net. And I think the customer acquisition cost is more complicated. I think that creating a customer acquisition strategy when you don't have anything to base it off of is more complicated. But what you did was like, how can we just do this of excellence and how can we make it better? And I think for the person just starting out, even if you already have a business, think about what could you include in your business? What other verticals can you be in that you can just do it better than your competition? I love that. I think there's so much value there. How did you go from Amazon to just proving viability to then saying, okay, we're really on to something here? Because now going into retail is a totally different animal as far as distribution. So where were you in your build, if you can remember, like revenue benchmarks when you started, like, okay, we're viable, let's start to scale this thing. And then what does that process look like? And how did that change your business model, if any?
Yeah. So in 2017, I think is when we had our initial conversation with Target, which I would describe as a watershed moment for the company. Target was our first real branded distribution in big box retail. And we knew demographically that the Target shopper and our shopper were very, very similar. I've written pretty extensively about how you can sell into physical retail. I knew nothing about it. It's a very somewhat kind of cottage industry of people and specialists that do this. It's a fairly tight knit community, and it was very opaque to me. So I had to kind of learn it as I went. Fortunately, I had somebody I'd gone to college with that had done this, and I ended up hiring them to be a part of our team to help us to learn. But one point I would make here before I talk about the specifics of our situation, I think there's a problem with how people think about their business often that can prevent them from being successful that really comes into play here, which is they're thinking about their business of, I want to make money. How could I go into physical retail where this would be great for me and be great for my company? You really have to start with another point of view, which is, how can I bring value to a target and a buyer at Target? How can I help them to achieve their goals? And okay, now that I know those different ways that I could help them achieve their goals, would that help me achieve my goals? And what you're trying to really goal seek for is, where are those situations where I'm helping somebody else win, and by helping them win, I'm also going to win? Too often people approach it the other way. Well, how do I want to win? And then now I'm going to convince somebody that they want to do that thing, instead of starting with, how do I help them win? So when we approached Target and pitched them on a partnership, we really hit two things pretty hard. One was, this is a period where Amazon's continuing to gain market share. And we were able to communicate, hey, we can see our demographics. Our customer is your customer. And here's what we can tell you. Your customer is buying literally millions of bottles from us annually. They're just not buying it from you. There's a very good chance they're walking down your aisles during the day, and then at night they're placing an order for our water bottle. And that's just a missed opportunity for you. The second thing we were able to communicate is, physical retail tends to move slower. Like, it wants to stay on trend, but it has longer cycles, and it's just less dynamic than e-commerce. And we were able to make a really credible argument that we just had access to a lot more real-time data than they do, and that we could use that to help them have the very best thing on shelf. So for us being more digitally native, we were able to come to the table with information about trends on colors or sizes, or what kind of lid was going to be in vogue. And that would help them to have more relevant offerings on their shelves. And they love the idea. So one thing that I did not think about probably enough before we went into physical retail was our brand footprint big enough to really support a partnership? Again, it's easy to think, well, like, if I'm on shelves, I'm going to get more sales, and that's great for me. But you can't think that one dimensionally. If the buyer is not hitting metrics that are good for them, then they're not going to evaluate that as a win. So we got in there when we were probably at like the bottom edge of the spectrum where we could make it work, where we could hit the kind of sell through that the buyer needed us to hit in order for it to be a good deal for them as well as for us. And then over about a 2.5 year period, through switching up the items and the brand continuing to grow, we got to the point where our performance got better and better and better, until right around 2020, 2021, we started to really lead the category, where we were at, where, out of the top 10 items in our section of the store, we might have had 7 of them. And obviously that was a pretty big kind of turning point for us. So, it was finding a physical retailer where their customer and our customer overlapped, finding ways where we really brought value to the table, then using our data and optimizing into what is the right offering, what are the right prices for this channel, and gradually expanding the partnership. And so it went from, like just a few $1 million partnership the first year to, I don't know, we might sell $60 million in retail at Target this year. Maybe it's more, maybe it's 80 million. I don't know. It's a lot, but we've really gradually and deliberately built that over time. And then what happened from there is that other retailers pay attention, right? So they pay attention to Target's numbers. They pay attention to, there's some industry data that they can buy. And if they see you doing really well, then they're going to be interested in selling you too. So we were actually approached by Walmart. We were approached by, all the other big box retailers saying, hey, we really like what we're seeing you do in Target, and we're interested in talking with you about it. So the sales job got a lot easier. It's one of the weird things about consumer packaged products, is that you really have, there's this idea of escape velocity, almost like you think about launching a rocket, that it takes, think about all the fuel and propulsion it takes to get that thing off the ground and get it going, because the Earth's gravity is really pulling down on it. But then there's this moment where if it can just get high enough in the atmosphere, then all of a sudden the gravity kind of falls away and it becomes, such smooth sailing, and you need so much less energy in order to continue to kind of rocket into the sky. Consumer goods are absolutely this way. Like early on, it was shocking to me how hard it was to get anybody to even really consider our product. And now we're at a point where we'll have major corporations sending us emails through our customer support line saying, hey, we'd love to carry your products. Can we talk to somebody? And it's just, kind of that mind blown, emoji where like, I can't believe we're living here. But you really can start to build a snowball that, then you're pushing it up the hill, and then there's an inflection point, and all of a sudden now you're chasing it down the hill. And that's kind of where we've gotten to as a brand. But it started with finding the right central channel in Amazon, and then finding the right secondary channel in physical retail. And that became, I would say, kind of the nucleus of the brand. And everything else is kind of built on top of those.
Yeah, the intentionality that's layered in your build, I think is so beautiful, and just want to acknowledge that, because I think it's a piece that most people miss, and that's why they're perpetually on this like entrepreneurial hamster wheel and not actually climbing the ladder. And one of the things that, just to kind of like wrap all that together, was it like, what's the inflection point? What's the intersection of somebody that could benefit value from your products, and then you in turn have value from that relationship, as opposed to the opposite? Like, just thinking with every single interaction, every email that you send to a company to carry your products, like if you just flip that, not only are you going to have a better chance, but you're going to stick out in that buyer's mind, like, wow, they actually value our relationship and our customer base. And then also to have the data and KPIs to back it up. Like, that's what I kept hearing, was that you were like, we have this data. These are the KPI. This was important to you. Here's why this would make sense, as opposed to just selling them on a vision and a dream. And then obviously that one relationship just opens so many doors, which is really what I think everyone's trying to, it's like, if you can prove your worth, which is really what you did, you're like, okay, here, Target, here's the data to support it. You get in there and then you prove your worth, and then everybody else is coming. And there's something you said that made me like reflect back on another build that I had, was you're then at that point where you're pushing it up the hill, then you're chasing it down the hill. But there's also challenges with that. Like, you doubling in revenue, I was like, congrats. But there was a part of me that was like, oh my gosh, because that's huge too. Doubling in revenue, that has its problems. So, I mean, how on earth did you support a complete 100% increase in revenue in your team and your distribution channels? Like, and maybe for everyone that thinks that's a dream and a gift, has there been any challenges with that?
Well, there absolutely are challenges. I mean, it's so ironic that after years in the nonprofit world, I would say since 2009, I've been involved in company building. So this is year 15, and probably 12 to 13 out of those 15 years, it's been growing companies at over 75, 80% a year. So, hyper growth is challenging. It's intoxicating and it's fun and it's maddening and it's stressful and it's just this unique kind of Red Bull of different emotions. And the biggest thing that I've learned through that process, Candy, is that this is where leadership and being able to actually build an organization becomes the superpower.
Mm.
And this is hard. This is why you get kind of serial entrepreneurs in my mind, is that some people really like the 0 to 1, the hands-on, the getting it launched, the excitement of seeing something start to kind of take off, but don't have a lot of interest in what comes next. The next step is really about, can I train? Can I multiply? Can I recruit? Can I lead? Can I cast vision? And that's become a lot more of my role. So I've been the CEO of Simple Modern for 8 years, but I've probably had 5 different jobs functionally, because at different stages in our growth, what the company needed from me, had to get from me in order to be successful, has been different. And frankly, that is not easy to do. And I've struggled with some of those transitions, because what it means is that you're functionally always at the frontier of your competence, that you're always at the edge of what you know how to do. And when we're in uncharted territory, the emotional tendency that we all have is, well, let me just do what I know how to do. I'll go back and I'll just do what I know how to do. And the problem is, as the leader, if you do that, then the organization can't grow. There are things I did when we had 10 employees that were very helpful at the time. If I'm doing it when we have 50 employees, it's not helpful anymore and probably stunting our growth. And if I'm doing it when we have 110 employees, then it's an absolute dumpster fire, that's actively hurting the organization. So for me, I think practically, really focus. This is where culture matters. Culture is one of those things you mentioned, like doing it early. Here's why I would advocate for doing culture early. It's not because I would argue that's going to make you more successful as a very early stage startup company. It might, but it's unlikely to, because very early stage is about product market fit. Nobody cared the giving we were doing when we were doing $10 million in revenue. That's not how we got to product market fit. It was about having an excellent product at a great price that was on trend and people wanted to buy that.
It's the what.
It was the what. Yeah. So now we had a why that was a really compelling why, but that wasn't what drove people to buy us. It was the what. The reason why having why first really mattered is, as we scaled, we knew exactly the type of organization we wanted to build. As we were in these really heady growth years, we were intentional about hiring. It wasn't just get whoever in the door. It was, hey, if we have to endure a little bit more pain and we have to interview for an extra month on this job in order to get the right person, we're going to do it. And so being intentional, what that meant is, when we started to get to 40, 50, 60, 100 in revenue, that we had a really solid base and a really solid culture. And we had the ability we had people that wanted to work here because they heard great things about the culture. We had the ability to recruit A+ level people. We had people that were able to train other people, that were able and ready to step into leadership positions. Like, basically, as your company grows, you're just creating more leadership roles. Do you have people that can step into them? And so as a result, we've been able to scale while keeping fidelity to the culture that we want to have. I mean, you'll hear founders talk about this all the time. It's easy to think bigger is better, but it's not often. Often it's worse. Reed Hastings famously started a company and took it public, and by the end of it, hated the experience so much that he vowed that his next company, he would do it really differently. And a lot of the way that they've built Netflix, which was his next company, is really different. But it's because he ended up hating the company that he built the first time. As a founder and a CEO, whatever your role is, the reason why we're in this is because we want to make a positive impact in the world. We want to provide for our family, and we want to feel like we have high quality of life, right? And the culture that we're immersed in is so much of that. So for me, I knew like, hey, if we grow, as we grow, if we lose this culture, if I start not wanting to come to work, this is not going to be fun for me. So yeah, we're having to manage all of these kind of operational questions and brand questions and product development questions. But to me, the biggest questions were all around organization. Am I going to be able to get through scaling this in a way where we are organizationally healthy, where I want to go to work every day,
Mhm.
and where the finances work. And I think that that's probably been the part that I was the most proud of, is that we were able to do it. I also think because of that emphasis on why and culture, it's also why we were able to scale. I would never say effortlessly, but I would say with less carnage than most companies experience, because we were prepared to multiply and we had people capable of taking on more.
Mm. Yeah. And I think what you said about the building the company that somebody then hates happens so often, and not just in large companies like, like in Reed's case, but in so many other small business owners, right? Like they
Yeah.
start out doing something and it's almost like you get sucked into, I don't know if it's the accumulation of more or the badge of honor that you broke, your first 10, 50, 100 million, 250 million. I don't know what it is, but I have experienced so many times in my life and working with entrepreneurs that it's like, oh my gosh, I hate going in. It's like, what did I even build? What am I building? And so they end up like getting in golden handcuffs and can't get out of what they actually don't enjoy. Can you maybe for a hot minute speak to that, as far as if somebody is in the minutia of the business and they're like, I am not doing what I love, how do you, aside from just duplicating yourself and hiring, how do you kind of get out in order to realize, what, I want to create something that I enjoy showing up to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that, like you said, you start from first principles thinking, which is, what am I trying to get out of this? It's interesting. I get asked questions all the time. I'm on podcasts. I have a podcast that is fairly large in the e-commerce community. I do with some other nine-figure operators, and there's a lot of questions we talk about, from hiring to compensation to product development, marketing, and what's the right way to do it. And what I almost invariably say is, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And that having a clear sense of what you're aiming at is so much of success. And it seems so simple, right? But if you just know where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get out of something, it's so much easier to actually do that.
Mhm.
For me, I am the personality type that I would go crazy if I didn't have an interesting problem to work on, right? And I know this about myself, and maybe not everybody's wired the way that I am, but I'm wired that way.
Mhm.
So I know that part of the reward for me is having an interesting balance business that has challenges that I get to show up to every day. Like, that's
Mhm.
part of high quality of life for me. Part of high quality of life for me is working on things with people that I enjoy, and being connected to the people I work with. Like,
Mhm.
that's not for everybody, but that is for me.
Right.
And another one for me is, it's important for me to be able to draw a straight line from how I spend my time during the day and making a positive impact in the world, and that I can actually, put those two things together. These are not everybody shares these things, although I
Mhm.
think those are typically pretty common. But knowing those things, I've worked backwards from that to design my role, to design my company. We will walk away from revenue sometimes if we feel like it pulls against those things. I mean, we've had people approach us about acquisitions. We've had people approach us wanting to be bought. Like,
Mhm.
this is a really good example. Typically, if you asked an entrepreneur and you said, hey, somebody approaches you with an opportunity to buy their business and it's a really good financial deal, like you're going to make X million dollars off of it, do you do it? And they would say yes. They wouldn't even ask for any more information. But the reality is, you should definitely ask some more questions. Like, how many people are involved? What would it look like to bring on that company? How does it change my day-to-day life? How does it change the role that I play? And these are questions that we tend to ask. So I wouldn't say that we've always gotten it right. We've definitely had decisions that we said, okay, wait a minute, this took us away from where we're trying to be. But because we had clarity around the type of environment that we want to create, it's made it easier to make decisions. And then when we get off track, to course correct, and to
Mhm.
pivot. So it hasn't removed the need for pivoting, but it's made more, it's been more of a North Star of understanding what we're pivoting towards. And whenever I'm feeling like, hey, I don't know if right now in my role, if I'm loving what I'm doing, or I feel like I'm using then it's easy for me to kind of say, okay, step back. What are the things you're looking to get out of the experience of leading the company?
Mhm.
And where are you getting off track? And a lot of times you mentioned it already, but it starts to become some arbitrary goal that I've set. Like, oh, well, we want to get to X revenue, or we want to get into Y, or um, whatever else. And then when I step back and I say, yeah, why? But why do I want to do that? Why is that going to make my life better? I
Mhm.
usually don't have a great answer.
Mhm.
So bigger is not always better. More is not always better. I'm a believer in the idea that like we want to be as profitable a business as we can. We want to give away as much money as we can within the construct of who we're trying to be.
Mhm.
So we're probably not ever going to be some $20 billion business because I'm not going to be wanting to go out there and just acquiring companies. It's just not the
Mhm.
kind of culture that we're trying to create.
Mhm.
But within the construct of who we're trying to be, I want to build as big a business as possible. But that's secondary to having that overriding kind of set of goals of, what is this thing supposed to be about? What do I want my life to look like? If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And man, it's so hard. Again, simple in concept, not easy to implement. It's so hard in a world that flashes us images of what we
Yeah.
should want and what success is and what massive success should look like. I think it's so hard to also have intentionality with the days that you have left on this earth to
Yeah.
not get sucked into that and to really like think about it so that you don't get, it's just so easy to get caught up in the next revenue benchmark, the next profit, the next company, the next whatever it may be. Because you've had such rapid growth and then scale to where you are now, is there anything that as you're looking back, or even maybe something you feel now that you are worried about? Because I think sometimes entrepreneurs that are listening to this story, they're like, well, you know what? I'm scared to death that I can even put together a customer acquisition plan. I'm scared to death that I can even last another quarter. You don't have the same fears, but is there something that you fear, worry about, wish that you would have done differently where you are right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are specific to the scale that the company's at. I want to be um, I feel a sense of responsibility. I think in our culture, when you build something really successful, I have a pretty high view of the level of responsibility that you have to the community, to the people that you employ, to your customers. And I feel that the way that I'll verbalize it typically is I think I have both the responsibility and the opportunity that comes
Mhm.
with a job like this. And it's kind of weighty, that there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of people's lives that get impacted by decisions I make. And that hopefully my that I'm not driven towards selfishness, I'm not driven towards self-interest, but I manage that well. I think another thing I've learned is that the only thing that more resources and more financial success of the company has highlighted to me is how limited our time is. And you said
Mhm.
that by far the most limited resource in my life is time. I've got enough money for 100 lifetimes, 1,000 lifetimes. I've got enough time for one lifetime, and so that's good to remember that, and to not get that backwards.
Mhm.
I think is another just kind of pitfall that I want to constantly be aware of. I've got young kids, so I think in my leading in a way, I mean, there's a lot of kind of harrowing statistics on families where there is significant wealth and how do kids
Yeah.
turn out. And so like, okay, am I teaching my kids how to think about money in a way that's really positive and where whatever comes next for them, that they're going to be able to manage that well. So I think those are some things that are specific to this stage. I think when it comes to the process of company building, you mentioned this earlier, but there were so many mistakes made that I would definitely want to communicate the way that you get to something like a simple modern outcome is a combination of character, persistence, willingness to pivot, luck, it's the whole thing. And I definitely think we have a group of pretty phenomenal humans that have helped build this company. But part of what's helped us get here has been the humility and commitment that building something like this takes. So I try to be really like, I don't ever want to communicate it where I make it sound easy because it definitely was not
Mhm.
easy. And I also I would want everybody listening to this to know in our culture, it's easy to associate um, quote unquote success with scale.
Mhm.
And I think that's generally a really unhelpful idea. That the idea that our business has a certain number of zeros behind it in revenue makes it a better story or a more important story than somebody who has one or two less zeros. I think is fundamentally untrue. And so I've learned along the way that my significance, my identity is not tied up in our revenue number, and it's not tied up in how many people know about what I'm building, but it should come from the actual quality of the mission behind what I'm doing and if I'm doing it to the best of my ability. And as I learned that, it was incredibly freeing
Mhm.
because there was a long period where I think emotionally I died 1,000 deaths on the revenue graph. You know,
Mhm.
if revenue was up, then I felt better about myself. And if revenue was down, I felt worse about myself as a leader, as a person. And the more that I've been able to find identity, outside of performance, that's been a really healthy thing for me.
Yeah, it's so important because I think that we do in our culture in the entrepreneurial world, we do often people tie their worth to their
Yeah.
company's revenue or their bottom line. And it's like, depending on what people believe in, I believe God put an inherent worth in you in your life and your time here that extends far beyond any revenue benchmark that you may hit. And I think for me, I also have 20 years in nonprofit that I started after I got successful in business. And I think when you see like the reality of what exists in the world and you
Hmm.
keep perspective, because it's so easy to lose that perspective. But when you maintain that perspective and you see the struggle and the strife and the real hardships that people are dealing with every single day, it's like the fact that you didn't add that zero or increase revenue 20% or do all of these things really doesn't devalue your worth in its place in the world. It's only if you attach your identity to it. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that ethos that I believe you and I both share. And so thank you for sharing that. I know our time is getting limited and I want everyone to know where to find you, but I do have one final question if you're open for it.
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So again, everyone's different places. They might be doing their first million or they're, doing 250 million in revenue. And so I just find that there's a lot of value that in the information that entrepreneurs have. So if you were to wake up tomorrow and everything that you've built at Simple Modern, all the relationships that you build at Target and Walmart, nobody knew your name. Nobody's going to pick up your call. You
Right.
have no money left in your bank account, but you have these beautiful kids that you need to provide for. And the only thing you get to retain is the information in your brain. And
Mm.
you've got to start to build it all back in this economy 2024. What would Mike start doing tomorrow in order to get himself out of that position?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's one I've actually kind of tried to mentally go through, and actually in some ways, because I feel so comfortable with this question, I think it's helped me to be a better business person because I don't have the same risk aversion of most people. I think
Mm-hmm.
most people when they get successful, it's like can't lose it. I'm terrified of what if it went away, and I don't really feel that because of the confidence I think I've developed in the ability to build value. I think I would start really simple. I'd say, what is something I've I know a lot about that I could enjoy that uses the internet that serves people, and I would just like start there where people would be happy to pay for it, and I would probably, if I had no capital, I would say I want to start something that requires very little capital that I could work a job and I could work on it nights, like almost even as a hobby until I built up enough of a snowball that it could support me full time. And then once I'd built up enough capital, I would probably go back to trying to do something product based because I have experience with it. But ironically, I probably wouldn't even do water bottles. Like I've told people I don't think I could recreate Simple Modern because some of it was timing based.
Mm.
But there were some principles I've learned, there's a lot of tools on the internet where I would start to look for what are Google search term trends or Amazon search term trends of categories that seem to be gaining a lot of steam,
Mhm.
and look like they could get pretty big, but they're still in the kind of emerging phases. I'm a really big believer that picking the right category is, to use a running example, it's the difference between running into a 20-mile-per-hour wind and running with it at your back.
Mm.
And so, no matter how good an entrepreneur you are, if you structurally set yourself up to succeed, it's just so much easier. And one other thing I would say is, I think if, in the kind of start over analogy, it's assumed that you would immediately start doing things like as quick as I
Mhm.
can. I got to build it back. I don't know that's how it would go with me. I think I would be much more willing to say, I'm going to sit back and wait for the right opportunity here. I'm going to be pretty methodical about it, but I don't feel like I have to do it immediately. And that was probably something that really helped me with Simple Modern, and would help me in this kind of scenario is that for a while I felt like I wanted to someday be a CEO of a company, but I was able to be patient enough until the right opportunity revealed itself. And because I had been patient, I had kind of the financial and relational and intellectual capital to really take a big swing when I got a great opportunity. So the reason I mentioned the internet, which is probably the last thing we're saying, is that the ability to do things with low investment and the ability to create asymmetric outcomes is just so much bigger because of technology. So, in a lot of ways, you could take my skill sets, and if you put me in the 1500s, maybe I'm just like a serf. I don't know. Like maybe I'm just a guy, but I know how to use the internet. And so, like, it's an amazing tool, and I would definitely make that part of the plan.
I love that. And you said, so I asked that question 200 episodes. That's my signature question. And only you, and do you know Heidi Zach, the founder of Third Love? They're
I
doing,
don't. I don't know. I have to look her up.
oh, she's brilliant. Like how, I think they're doing like a quarter billion in revenue.
Wow.
And she's like, I know you told me you just took everything away, but I need time to think. I need time to plan. And I was
Mm,
like, you're literally only the second person I've ever asked that
mm,
said that. And that takes discipline.
yeah.
It takes a lot of discipline and I think that entrepreneurs can learn. And that's why I'm just bringing this up again and putting a little bullet point on it, is because I think so often we're so caught up in the doing that we don't intentionally pause and decide what it is that we want to build. And we let this company build us and take us
Yeah.
into a direction that we don't want to go. And we end up trading away all of the freedom that we thought we wanted to be in business for ourselves all along. So I love that. Brilliant
Well said.
answer. Thank you so much. Tell everyone, where can they find you, more about you? You have a podcast. That's amazing. So give us all
Yeah,
the.
so I'm really committed. Our company's mission statement is we exist to give generously, and the way that I've applied it to some of how I use my time is obviously I'm really uniquely situated in running the company, and what I want to do is as much as possible give away the things that I've learned by being able to be a part of this journey. So a couple of different resources. I'm active on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, and LinkedIn, and you can follow me there. Mike Beckham SM, I think, is the handle on both of those. And then I've also done quite a few things in the podcast world. I've created kind of like a podcast that every so often I'll do a few episodes called Scaling for Good. One of which is, I would say, just kind of leadership principles we've learned in building the company the first season. And then the second set of episodes we did there, it's literally me just sitting down with people in the company. Like, here's me and our chief sales officer. Let's talk about from ground zero how we built this and what were the challenges and how to, tactically and strategically, how did we do it? So it's a little bit more specific, but especially if you're building a product or a consumer brand, could be really helpful. So anyway, those are probably the best ways to hear more from me.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll make sure to link all of that up for everybody. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing so much. It was such an honor to be able to talk to you and just talk a little bit more about Simple Modern and all the great things that you've done. And so I just want to recognize you for that and thank you for your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on and thanks for doing this. I mean, just like I said, I'm trying to give away knowledge and you're doing the same thing with this podcast. And I think it's a great use of time and admire that you're doing it.